How did the poor survive in the time of Jesus more than 2,000 years ago? We often imagine poverty in the ancient world as something distant, almost picturesque, simple people living simple lives. But what if that image is dangerously incomplete? What did a poor family actually eat when the harvest failed? Where did they sleep when they had no house to call their own? How did a mother keep her children alive through a winter with no reserves, no savings, no safety net? And what happened to those who fell below the lowest rung? The beggars, the sick, the forgotten ones who appear in the Gospels, but rarely in our imagination. When you truly understand what survival meant for the poor in first-century Galilee, the words of Jesus stop being religious poetry. They become emergency instructions. Stay until the end, because what you will discover is not just history. It is the context that makes the gospel come alive with an urgency we have almost forgotten. The first thing to understand is this: poverty in the time of Jesus was not one thing. It was a spectrum, and the difference between one level and the next could be measured in meals, in days without bread, in the slow disappearance of everything a family once owned. At the top of this spectrum were the working poor, farmers with small plots of land, fishermen with modest boats, carpenters, potters, laborers. They worked every day. Their hands were rough, their backs bent before their time. But they survived. They had shelter. They had food most days. They had something to lose. Below them were the desperate poor, families who had already lost their land to debt or taxes, day laborers who waited in the marketplace each morning hoping someone would hire them. If no one did, they did not eat. That was it. No appeal, no second chance. The parable Jesus tells in Matthew 20 about workers hired at different hours was not fiction. It was daily reality. Men standing idle because no one had hired them. Not lazy, not unwilling, simply invisible. And below even them were the destitute, the beggars, the blind, the lame, the lepers, those who could not work at all. They survived on charity alone, crumbs, leftovers, the mercy of strangers, or they did not survive. Jesus moved among all these layers. He saw them. He touched them. He called them blessed. But to understand why that mattered, we need to go deeper. We need to see what the poor actually faced when they opened their eyes each morning. The first battle was not spiritual. It was physical. Hunger. And hunger in first-century Galilee was not like skipping a meal. It was a slow violence that began in the stomach and spread to every corner of life. The poor did not eat what they wanted. They ate what they could find. Sometimes that was almost nothing. Bread was the center of everything. Not the soft, warm bread we imagine. This was flat, coarse, made from barley, the cheapest grain available. Wheat was for the wealthy. Barley was for those who had no choice. It was dense, heavy, hard to digest, but it filled the stomach. It kept you standing for another day. A poor family might eat twice a day. Once in the morning, a small piece of bread dipped in sour wine or olive oil if they had any. Once in the evening, bread again, maybe with lentils, onions, or a handful of dried beans. Meat was rare. Fish was more common near the Sea of Galilee, but even that was not guaranteed. Some families went weeks without tasting animal protein. Weeks. And then there was salt. Without salt, food spoiled quickly. Without salt, everything tasted like dust. Salt was not a luxury. It was survival. When Jesus said in Matthew 5 that his followers were the salt of the earth, the poor understood immediately. Salt preserved. Salt gave meaning to what would otherwise rot and disappear. Water was another daily struggle. No pipes, no fountains in poor neighborhoods. Women walked long distances to wells, carrying heavy clay jars on their heads. 1 jar, 2 jars, enough for drinking, cooking, minimal washing. Every drop counted. Wasting water was not carelessness. It was unthinkable. In this context, hunger was not dramatic. It was quiet. A child who stopped growing. A mother who gave her portion to her children and said she was not hungry. A father who worked all day and came home to a single piece of bread. Nobody announced their suffering. They just endured it. The body adapted. It learned to function on less. But the mind never forgot. Anxiety lived in the stomach. The question was never, what will we eat tomorrow? It was, will we eat at all? Jesus knew this. He grew up in a family of modest means. Nazareth was a small village, perhaps for 100 people. with no mention in any ancient text outside the Gospels. Joseph was a tekton, a builder, a craftsman, not wealthy, not destitute, somewhere in between, where one bad season could tip the balance. When Jesus taught his disciples to pray, he included a line that wealthy theologians have spiritualized for centuries. Give us this day our daily bread. But for the poor who first heard it, there was nothing metaphorical, nothing symbolic. It was literal. It was desperate. A prayer born from empty stomachs and uncertain tomorrows. This daily hunger shaped everything. How people thought, how they planned, how they understood God. Food was only one problem. The other was shelter. And for many poor families, the walls that protected them were barely walls at all. Not everyone who was poor had a house, and not everyone who had a house was safe. The working poor lived in small structures made of rough stones and mud. One room, maybe two, no windows, or just a small opening covered with cloth. The floor was packed earth. The roof was branches and mud that needed constant repair. When it rained, water seeped through. When it stormed, pieces fell. These houses demanded endless work just to remain standing. And still they crumbled. But at least they were houses. Below this level were those who rented corners of rooms from others. Entire families sleeping in a space no larger than a modern bathroom. No privacy, no stability. If they could not pay, they were out. No negotiation, no delay. Just gone. And below even that were those who had nothing at all. They slept in fields, in caves, under trees, in the colonnades of public buildings. The Gospel of Luke chapter 16 describes Lazarus lying at the gate of the rich man, covered in sores, hoping for scraps. This was not poetic exaggeration. This was reportage. People lived like this. People died like this. The Gospels do not record everything Jesus saw. They could not. The cold was a killer. Galilean winters are mild by some standards, but for a body weakened by hunger, without adequate clothing, without fire, without walls, a single cold night could end everything. The elderly died first, then the sick, then the very young. Clothing made the difference between life and death, but the poor often had only one garment, a single tunic worn day after day, patched until the patches needed patches. The outer cloak, if they had one, served as blanket at night. This is why the law of Moses in Exodus 20 commanded that, if a cloak was taken as collateral for a loan, it had to be returned before sunset. Without it, how would the poor man sleep? How would he survive the night? Disease was everywhere. With no sanitation, no medicine, no understanding of infection, sickness spread easily. A cut could become fatal. A fever could last for weeks. The poor had no access to physicians, not because doctors did not exist, but because they could not pay. Mark chapter 5 tells of a woman who had spent everything she had on doctors and only grew worse. She was not unusual. She was typical. When illness struck, the poor faced impossible choices. Work sick and risk collapse. Stay home and lose the day's wages. Spend the last savings on a remedy that probably would not work. There was no good option, only less bad ones. And then there was debt. The silent destroyer. A bad harvest. An unexpected tax. A family illness. Suddenly, the small farmer owed money he could not repay. Interest accumulated. Land was seized. Children were sometimes sold into servitude. The spiral was vicious. Once it began, few escaped. Jesus watched all of this. He saw families collapse. He saw the wealthy ignore the dying at their gates. And when he spoke, he did not speak from theory. So read the Gospels carefully. When we read the Gospels from comfortable homes with full refrigerators, we miss something essential. We miss the weight, the desperation, the raw survival that shaped every word Jesus spoke to the crowds who followed him. He did not speak to people mildly concerned about their retirement plans. He spoke to people who did not know if they would eat tomorrow. To mothers watching their children grow thin. To fathers who had lost everything and stood in marketplaces hoping for a few hours of work. To beggars who had been invisible their entire lives. When Jesus said in Matthew 6, "Do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about itself." He was not offering relaxation advice. He was speaking to people paralyzed by anxiety, people for whom worry was not a bad habit but a constant companion. His words were not dismissive. They were revolutionary. He was telling the poor that their value did not depend on their ability to secure the next meal, that God saw them even when no one else did. When he said, "Blessed are the poor," in Luke 6, he was not romanticizing poverty. He was inverting the entire social order. In a world that despised the poor, that blamed them for their own suffering, that saw wealth as proof of divine favor, Jesus declared the opposite. The kingdom belongs to you, not to those who feast while you starve. This was not comfortable teaching. It was dangerous. It threatened everyone who benefited from the system that crushed the poor, and it gave hope to those who had been told they deserved their misery. Jesus did not observe poverty from a distance. He lived close to it. His family was not wealthy. His ministry had no budget. He depended on the hospitality of others. He knew what it meant to have nowhere to lay his head. When he touched lepers, he touched the untouchable. When he ate with sinners, he shared tables that respectable people avoided. When he fed the 5,000, he addressed a hunger that was not just spiritual. It was real. It was immediate. Understanding this context does not diminish the Gospels. It amplifies them. It shows us a Christ who was not distant from human suffering, but embedded in it. His teachings were not abstract philosophy. They were survival wisdom wrapped in divine authority. The poor who heard him recognized something. This man knows. This man sees us. 2,000 years later, that recognition still echoes. And if this documentary strengthened your faith and expanded your understanding of the scriptures, leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and share this video. Your support allows more people to discover the history that sustains the Christian faith. Until the next video.